Okay, so hello and welcome to this panel for Middle Ground Book Fest. The topic of our panel today is quests, riddles, recipes, maps, and props, exploring tips and techniques for building your next story no matter the genre. I am Rachel Patton, and I'm really excited to be here with this remarkable group of authors and illustrators and creatives. I'm going to just give them a chance to quickly introduce themselves, starting with Anita.
Hi, I'm Anita Mishra. I'm the author of the Ethan Murphy series. So, Ethan Murphy and the Race for the Incan Crown is the second book in the series, and it came out earlier this year.
Excellent.
Hi everyone, I'm Payal Doshi and I am the author of Ria and the Blood of the Nectar, which is a middle grade fantasy, and it released this June. And I'm so excited to be here. Hi, I'm Nicole Lesperance, and I am the author of, it's backwards on here, The Nightmare Thief, which just came out in January, and then the sequel, The Dream Spies, is coming out next winter.
Hi, everyone. I'm Edward Fodi. I'm the author of many fantasy humor books. Most recently is the Secret of Zoom series. And later this year, I'm really excited to introduce Spellsweeper to the world, which is all about a magical girl who cleans up magical messes.
Awesome. I'm Adam Perry. My book, The Thieving Collectors of Fine Children's Books, came out this March. And then prior to that, I had written The Magicians of Elephant County, both kind of adventure, action, humor, middle grade books.
Wonderful. So we're all here because you write stories for middle grade readers. I'm really lucky because I get to work with middle grade readers every single day. 8 to 12 or 13-year-olds. They're pretty amazing, pretty awesome. And I want to thank you all for writing stories for them. It's kind of a pivotal age for reading. It's kind of a time when there's more expectations from school and teachers to read for learning rather than by choice, even though both of those things can easily go together. But thank you in advance for putting these incredible magical stories out there for some of my favorite people. So the topic of this panel, again, is has to do with sort of non-traditional or unexpected techniques for creating stories. Many of us, especially those of us who aren't authors, often think of story building as something that happens really internally, right? It happens in your brain, you think about it, or when you're writing a story, you're using a pencil and paper, you're using a computer, you're using a typewriter. But I think that like most things, it actually looks quite different than what us non-writers think it does. So I wonder what kinds of strategies, what non-writing strategies do you use to build an imagined world? Let's start with Anita.
You're muted, Anita.
Oh, now can you hear me?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, I have said everything that I wanted to.
That's a great answer.
You missed it.
Okay, so I draw maps. I have yet to include any maps in the book. The reason being, I might get some squints if authors have maps in their books, because see, I want to know how my world looks to me, especially when I'm writing, but I want to give chance to the readers to imagine how they want to see the world. I'll show you my map. It really looks not so great, but I don't know whether you can even see this.
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah.
Looks amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, but I plan to include going forward because I get super excited to see maps in the book and to know where people are going, what they are doing, and what is happening where. So, see, like I'm torn between two parts, whether I should include map in the book or not, but I definitely go for maps when I start writing. Okay. Other than that, I like to have music. Okay. Music, I not exactly plan, but it comes to my mind. When I started writing Ethan Murphy series, all that I had in my mind was Indiana Jones. So so that theme music keep running in my mind, and every day we read the story. Once we finish writing, my children read the story each day. It's like live performance, all right. And my husband will be sitting there with his laptop to play the Indiana Jones music as soon as the reading is done. So these are the basic things that I do while writing.
Wow, that's great. It's pretty amazing to get a peek into your process for creating these incredible stories. Payal?
Yeah, it's really funny that you said Indiana Jones, Anita, because I have read the first book in the Ethan Murphy series, and it fully gives me the Indiana Jones vibes. Like I fully got it while reading it. So clearly that worked well. I also have maps, but I feel like before I get into maps, when I start thinking about this new world that I'm trying to create, a lot of it happens not on like actually writing down things. I need to spend some time researching. So a lot of online research takes place from something as basic as just Googling fantasy images on Google, and just looking at different landscapes and sceneries. And sometimes I'll have an idea about, pulling from mythology or folklore or from Indian culture, and I'll just like go down this rabbit hole of research. But almost always I will come away with something. So that's one technique I use to build my world. I also recommend watching a lot of TV. That really helps. And keeping your eyes open, generally, even from outside with my family or friends, I remember once I saw this butterfly flitting by, and it had this amazing sort of like cerulean azure kind of blue in it. And that just ticked off an idea in my head because I was thinking of a landscape and I was like, that should be the color of the rock face, or, so it's like so many of these things happen organically that don't necessarily have to just do with pen and paper. And then, yes, I do maps. I will show you one of my very early sketches of a map. Also lots of notebooks. Again, in a fantasy book especially, and Ria is very quest driven, so I really need to know where they're going and how long it's going to take them. And sometimes in that process, if I realize they're getting to this place very quickly or there isn't enough tension, then I'm like, okay, I need to create something to up the tension, maybe in terms of a really difficult road ahead, like literally the terrain and landscape wise, or inject some sort of magical creation in there for them to then battle or whatever. So anyway, so that's my map. It's like literally what a 3-year-old might draw, but you can see the trees, and I have those are mountains. But maps, yes, and then they slowly and steadily get more and more detailed. So then this is when I realized there we go. So then that's the map I drew out. I would trace it out looking at different maps online. And then eventually I landed up with something like this, which was, I was very proud of myself for someone who had no experience in map drawing. And then that's the reference I gave my illustrator, and that's what you have in the book.
It's awesome.
That's beautiful.
That's great.
Really cool. Really cool. Nicole,
Can you show
what
it compared to
about you?
the final one? I'm curious what it looks like in the
Oh,
book.
yeah.
Is it like a direct copy, or do they just kind of read
It
the book
is,
as
but
well?
it's done. Yeah,
Very cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. She gave her touch to it, obviously, but so it's really fun. It really helps. I think map making also helped me plan in places in my sequel, because that's one of the things especially if you're writing a sequel, for me especially, Writing the first book, I didn't think about the second book as much. I was like, if we get there, then I will think about it. And so again, making maps help.
Excellent. Wow, it's really cool. It's really cool to see the beginnings, the stages of your world. Nicole, what types of strategies do you use to build your story?
So first off, I am so in awe with your artistic skills, Payal. It's that map is like really amazing. My art skills are like absolutely zero, so I am really impressed with what you made. So the Nightmare Thief is contemporary fantasy. The town itself is magical, but it is set in like a normal United States where the rest of the world is normal. So I had to do like really a different strategy for world building for this story. And a lot of what I did was mainly like, how can I take a thing and that is a normal world thing and kind of magicify it so that it fits within the world and the characters for my story. So like an example for that would be, so I based the town on Brighton in England and Bar Harbor in Maine. It's kind of a magical mashup of those two places. And in Brighton, they have this little, or they used to, it's been a long time since I've been there, but they used to have this little donut stand. And it's this automated thing that like kind of like plops out the donuts and brings them down a conveyor belt and fries them and cooks them. And then like you get them. So I had this idea, like, how could I have donuts on this pier in my town, but make them magical? And it ended up, one of my kids was like, you should make disco donuts. And I was like, I have no idea what that is, but yes. And so then it kind of morphed into this like machine that plays disco music, and everyone's like dancing while they wait for their donuts, and they come out and they have flashing sprinkles on them. So like it's kind of like what you were saying, Payal, about how you see these things in the regular world and you kind of feel inspired by them. You kind of throw them into your story and put your own spin on them. So I think I had to do a lot more of that kind of work rather than like maps and world building and things like that, which is probably the best for me considering my artistic skills. And it was tricky. It can be tricky to get enough magic that the place doesn't feel too real. So I think every time I revised, I just kind of threw more magic onto it as I went.
I think I want a disco donut now.
Yeah, I feel like that's definitely something that should happen.
You need to make them.
It's the worst when you write something and it's not a real thing.
Well, I like to make things real. I think that's part of what I am trying to always do when I'm writing and creating worlds. I really wish things were real. And I think part of my strategy is to build things or to make things to try and make them real. So I want to echo what Payal said. I never start a book by running off to my computer or sitting down even at a keyboard. Everything kind of starts for me in a really kind of plain brainstorming book. And that's where I start collecting ideas. And I want to echo too, like what the sorts of things we're talking about here in terms of paying attention to the real world. And I know for my latest book, for years and years, I found that I traveled quite a bit and I kept finding brooms, just like sitting in a corner of a temple or on a street corner. And there was something in my mind that kept pestering me. And I was asking myself, there's something with these brooms. What are these brooms doing? What are these brooms doing? So I started doing what I always do, which is I would take notes in my brainstorming book. I would take pictures and I just let it percolate. And eventually, so I'm very patient now when it comes to creativity because I'm generally working on something. I'm generally working on a book, but meanwhile, one other corner of my brain is collecting data, right, for other things. So I eventually realized for my latest book, Spellsweeper, I was going to write a book about magical brooms, and I just need to figure out what that was going to be about. And eventually I decided brooms in the magical world are for the same thing they are for in the real world. They clean up messes, except the messes are magical. So it just so happens that I live like within walking distance from a broom store. So like they make brooms. So I contacted the person and I asked her if I could interview her, and I got to go down. And by this point in my life, I've bought many brooms, so including this one, which I bought from the broom store. And this is actually the broom that was sent. A photo of this broom was sent. It's hard to get into screen here, but anyway, you can see it's quite cool. It's got these prongs on it. We sent this photo to the illustrator, and it's the broom that is on the cover. But I got to interview the broom store owner, and she made a broom. I got to watch her make a broom, and I found out the process of making a broom. And I found this all really exciting to me. And it wasn't until after I interviewed her that I realized my own grandfather used to make brooms. And I actually have one of his own handmade brooms somewhere, and so do my parents. But so I guess it all kind of comes full circle. But for me, the idea of a prop or bringing these things to a kind of tangible existence really helps me in the writing process. So I feel I am very visual. And sometimes I think maybe I'm not that good of a writer because I need all of these things around me to kind of bring it, get these words, coax these words out of me. But definitely there's no two ways about it. It's such a key part of my process.
Amazing. That broom is incredible. I'm just kind of in awe. Yeah.
Yeah, it is amazing. And I really, even the design of it and the prongs on it started playing a role in the book. So yeah, there's something about a prop that you can hold. I also make, and there's an egg in this book too that's coming up, and I make a lot of different dragon eggs and things like that. Inevitably, I have a dragon egg in a book. But I always like to know what those things feel like or how big they are. Like, will they fit in a character's palm? What would it be like? Can you actually put it in a pocket? So for me, that's part of it too. It's just actual practical description and logistics of a scene or a chapter.
So Lee, was it you who mentioned eggs in your bio and maybe not caring for them so much?
Oh yeah, real like chicken eggs. They're disgusting. Yeah, I think I grew up on a chicken farm. Full disclosure, so there may be some psychological damage there, but I actually think I'm technically allergic to eggs because there's something my body viscerally reacts when I smell them. So when my wife cooks eggs for lunch, which she so often does, I have this visceral reaction to them. So yes, it's kind of a funny, but I love making them. They're awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're amazing what they do. We have chickens, and we also have kids, and we've discovered that knowledge is powerful, and sometimes knowing exactly what goes on with the eggs and the chickens is. Yeah,
it's not. You may not want to know how
Did you say knowing exactly?
I didn't, but I should have.
Eggs do not come. Let's just say eggs do not come out all nice and shiny like we find them in the carton at the store.
They don't. They can be pretty weird. But that one that you have, like in thinking about an article that's based, on something very real. So, oh my gosh.
Yeah, well, I also teach creative writing. So a lot of what I would do with my students is make props or bring props in to inspire them as well. So it's awesome to, ask a student to build something and then write about what comes from it, right? So I think I bring that part of my own process to the classroom as well.
What do you make those out of? What's like the base of that?
Well, the base of it can actually be a real eggshell, and I have definitely used real chicken eggs to make eggs, but generally around springtime, Easter time, I'm just buying a lot of shells like that are available at the dollar store, and otherwise it's just sculpting and acrylic jewels, and I collect a lot of junk. I use a lot of found objects to create stuff, so I'm not whenever an appliance dies in our house, I just cannibalize it for parts like a Jawa, and I put it in a kit, and then I'm just like, I don't know what I'm going to build out of this, but I'm going to build something. So that's just part of, I was like that when I was a kid. I would do these things, and I realized it took me until I was published to realize how interconnected creativity is and can be and probably should be. And instead of partitioning these into like, now I am drawing, now I am writing, now I am building, I realized they're all just interconnected and one informs the other.
This is very true, but I will say that there's some level of skill required where I would love to do what you do. That's just so cool. But I have no skill in making things out of nothing except maybe words into sentences. And also I would use that as my best excuse for procrastinating from writing. So
Oh, you see, I that's interesting because I find that, there's that old kind of saying, like, if you want to work through a plot, do the dishes or take a shower or take a walk, whatever it is. So for me, yeah, my brain, that part of my brain that writes can get quite exhausted. But I still want to be in my world or do something. So I find if I sit down and build something, I'm still in my world, I'm working through things. It's not as helpful to the household as doing the dishes, but it still is part of my process, I guess. And I've learned to manage my energy and know when I need to get away from the screen and do something else, but I still want to somehow be productive or in my world, if that makes sense.
oh yes, it's amazing. It's amazing.
Truly, truly. Adam, what strategies do you use to...
Yes, something that Anita said that I didn't really think about before this was music, and I think that's really important. Like, I'm not a crafty person or like handy with tools at all, so I'm definitely not
Neither am
building
I,
any-
by the way.
I'm definitely not building anything. But like music for me is like I definitely have like songs that kind of I'm listening to in regards to certain books. And I've seen some authors, like, they'll share those, and I've never really been that type, because I feel like music is such a personal preference. You could really turn someone off with your personal preference. But I definitely have like certain songs, like the new thing I'm working on. I definitely have a playlist that's kind of around that atmosphere that I want to create in my own mind. And the one thing that I talk about in any school visit I go to, certainly reading, that's an inspiration, but I play a lot of video games too. And my new book, The Thieving Collectors, I was playing a lot when I was writing it of the new Zelda game, Breath of the Wild. And in this book, he's kind of in a fantasy land with, big vistas and mountains and things like that. So like that game right there could kind of put me in that landscape. And that was sort of a game where you kind of make the story. There's really barely any story in that game at all. If you've played the game, you're just kind of running around and you kind of shape your own story. So I like that. And it's sort of, it sort of inspired some of the direction of the feeling of the game, of the book. Sorry, not a game. But it's interesting as well, because I do the interior illustrations for my books up to this point, at least. So when I'm writing though, I'm definitely a seat of the pants writer. I don't really doodle about my book, which is interesting. Like, I never really thought about that before this moment. But even though I'm an illustrator, my doodles are about like other stuff or other ideas I have. They're never like a book that I'm working on. And I think probably the reason for that is my books, I feel like they're changing all the time while I'm writing them. And then especially once they get through editorial. And if I do illustrations or stuff in a certain way, it could completely change, or maps like that. So, I'm definitely kind of flying by the seat of my pants. And then the book is in editorial process. And that's when I actually kind of work on maps and things like that. So I don't have any sort of plan when I'm working. I'm just sort of a mess, I think. But I do have this kind of, if you could tilt the camera in my office, you'd see it's just kind of a mess with piles everywhere. So I have this kind of love of found objects and kind of the messiness of things. So, in Magicians of Elephant County, this book here is, the conceit of it is it's told each chapter is a file in a police evidence box. And then each chapter cover is like a police file. And then there's like, let me see if I can hold it up. There's like pictures. There's a little bit of like newspapers, and there's playing cards, and there's, I had to draw things that looked crumpled and things like that. So everything's just kind of stacked and messy. So that's kind of the found part of my illustrations. And then I'll do maps, but I always do them after the whole story's over. And it's not really for me to get an idea, because I feel like if you're just kind of vague enough, it works. Like, I don't ever want to be like, you got to turn left at this street, you got to turn right 500 feet, don't go to the right. Like, I feel like my brain doesn't work like that. So I'm vague enough that, I can do a map. Here's the map of the town of Elephant County. And it's very vague. I do have street names, but I don't think if you went to this county, you would get super lost with this map. I don't think it works really at all.
So Adam,
but
you're
I
saying
did.
we shouldn't rely on you to be our dungeon
Nope.
master.
I have the worst sense of direction ever. I can get lost anywhere. GPS was.
I feel like I
GPS
want to challenge you on that. I think, maybe we better not travel together.
Yeah, I mean, GPS was a life changer for me because like I could get lost in my own town that I've lived in my whole life. But then, like in this book as well, this doesn't have as much interior illustrations, but some of the comments that I got was the world's it's really big and it's hard to kind of imagine necessarily where things are. So I wrote into the book that the boy loved the book that he goes into in this story. And then, he loved it that he created a map. So it may not be accurate, but this 12-year-old boy created a map, and then he taped paper up on his wall. You had mentioned earlier that your drawings look like kids' drawings. Well, that's exactly what I went for. So it's like I drew paper kind of taped to a wall. I drew it like he would draw it. So it's a way to have a map in the book, but kind of have it in a tongue-in-cheek way. So I always kind of like to have that conceit around things. I think that's, I guess that's kind of my thing at this point. But and then just tie it back to the broom. In this book here, he goes inside his favorite story, and then the villains of the book, which are up here, have this sort of vacuum cleaner called the Cortextia, which they can vacuum the story essentially up from his mind. And just to get it back to video games, that was sort of inspired by like a Luigi's Mansion type thing where he's got the vacuum cleaner. I also started writing it around the time we got a Dyson stick vac, so maybe that's my prop. Ties in with your broom a little bit. So I was like, yeah, I'm walking around, I'm cleaning up stuff. I'm like, yeah, this is part of my book. But even then, I don't know why I never actually doodled the Cortextia. And then the illustrator of the cover, David Sanangelo, he read the book and he drew it completely different than a Dyson. But I was like, that's part of the fun of it for me. It's like I have it a certain way. I describe it just enough, and then let's do something else. And I liked it, and hey, let's go with it. But I feel kind of challenged now. I want to get a little bit more crafty and maybe try to build something.
I think there's a really interesting dynamic between, because I've illustrated books too, but I feel like there's such a difference now in my mind, such a separation between what I'm drawing to generate ideas and what I would do. I find it so interesting, Adam, you said like you do the writing, then the illustrations, because I feel when I'm in this notebook, I'm not illustrating, I'm doodling. I'm just,
right.
It's my brain working, and I have no illusions that I'm going to take this and turn it into an illustration. It's just me working out my ideas.
Yeah.
And so I find that a really interesting comment and process.
Well, I have a weird, I'm very compartmentalized. Like I write 1 hour in the morning, and I try not to think about my book ever again outside of that 1 hour. I do. Certainly it bleeds through, but I can only personally think story and character and world while I'm at a keyboard. Anything else, I can't sit down and think out a plot. It only kind of comes out through my fingers, if that makes sense. While I'm typing. So I really try to that's my hour and then forget about it. So I don't know, maybe that's different. I don't know.
I imagine that each one of you has a totally different practice for writing when you're actually putting words to paper. What you brought up, Adam, is really curious to me about how you you do the map or you do the illustrations after you've written the story. So in thinking about Lee's eggs, I was wondering for the rest of you, what comes first, the story or the song, the story or the map, the world? What do you notice first? Let's start with Payal for this one.
For Ria, it's a portal fantasy, and from the get-go, I knew that I wanted the land to be very lush, because that's my idea of this high fantasy place is really lush, verdant, floral. And so that's the idea I had from the beginning. So in that sense, the theme of the world came first. But then in terms, and then it's also a continuous process. But then the plot of the story, I focused on that. And as I kept building on and I started writing on, I would add in things, something Nicole mentioned before, where she said that in every revision, she would throw in more magic. And that's precisely what I did. Because in my land, they go from India to the magical land of Astranthia. And so I always needed to make sure that I made Astranthia more and more magical so as to completely, differentiate the two places. But so there would be places where, for example, there's a scene in the book. It's a very pivotal scene. It's in the, bang center of the book. It's where Ria, goes in search of her twin brother who has gone missing, and she has to rescue him in this fantastical land. And in order to do so, one of her first trials is to cross this magical lake to get to him. And so then I'm like, okay, I know that there has to be a magical. I need an obstacle. And we're in this magical place, so obviously it has to be magical, but I had no idea what I wanted to add to it. So then I started thinking about it, and many lakes in India generally around the world as well, ponds, and they have lilies and lotuses. And so I was like, okay, maybe I can do something to make them venomous and have teeth or whatever. And so I started spitballing on that idea. And then again, I should say, I feel like most of us aren't as talented as Adam or Lee, that we are illustrators as well as writers. So when Lee showed up, his doodle, I was like, oh, wow, that's so good. These are my doodles. This is what in my head was like, oh yes, this is my evil magical creature. I don't think any person who would see this would think that. But I essentially created serpent lilies. So lilies that have, snake bodies at the bottom of the lake where you can't see them. So you just see their, beautiful flowers, but they're venomous at the bottom. And so for me, the process is very intertwined. The other thing I would do is, in my book, I have riddles that Ria needs to solve to figure out where her brother is. And so it's not even that I love riddles or poems, but kind of like Lee said, that it leaves me. I feel like I'm using a different part of my brain when I'm working on those and coming up with those. It doesn't necessarily feel like I'm writing, and that when that part of my mind is fatigued creatively. Coming up with riddles is fun. It's almost refreshing. And I wanted there to be riddles in this book. It also, I think, for me, I found that it ended up showcasing, giving me a chance to showcase the two characters in my book, Ria and her friend Leela, who go on this quest to find Rohan, show different personality traits. So they have these bunch of riddles that this fortune teller in the village sort of tells them, and here they have to figure them out. Obviously, they're riddling, so they cannot figure it out. I could delve into Ria's process, which is messy, and she's making notes and underlying and scratching things out and creating lists and just doodling and coming up with, different ways to unravel these riddles and find out what they mean. And Leela is very, let's tabulate them, and, let's call this the mystery of Rohan's disappearance, or let's put facts and assumptions. And I find that, that's what these different tools that we use to add meat to the story, they can do so much. In terms of Serpent Lilies, it again adds a sense of evil to the place. It shows you the extent of how the magic in this land can get, dark. It's a great tension point and a conflict. Whereas something fun as riddles is that you can show personality traits, delve into that. And so, yeah, I would say I do come up with them on the fly. I never went into this book saying that I'm going to have a map, I'm going to have all of these evil creatures, I'm going to have riddles. It happened very organically. Lots of trial and error.
That's the way.
Exactly.
That's the way. So, Adam, you did already share with us that kind of the maps, the illustrations, these the doodling, it comes after the story. You do the story first, and then you kind of fill in or flesh out.
Yeah. So like for me personally, I find for me, if I outline, I really stick to that outline too close, and it really makes the book suffer. So the way that I've kind of learned over a few now that I write is I want to just kind of go by the seat of my pants on the first draft, just kind of make an absolute mess of everything. You know, not plan for the bad characters, not plan for what happens, not plan for the world, just like throw these characters together. It's not going to make any sense. In every book, it completely falls apart in the third act. You know, it's a mess. But I feel like that's kind of that first draft that's terrible is kind of just like getting all the ingredients together. And, you know, in the case of my new book, you know, he's going inside of his favorite book. And I needed like a reason why they were going from point A to point B to point C. So I put a riddle in there, and I'm really bad at coming up with riddles. In fact, a new book I'm working on has a riddle in it. And that was the hardest part, was like to come up with this riddle. But my brain just doesn't work in riddles. But there was a riddle in this other book, and I kind of allowed myself to do a bad job because he was in a book he had read already, so he knew the answer to all the riddles. It was the other characters that didn't, so he could ingratiate himself with them by knowing all the answers to these riddles that they don't know. But yeah, all that to say, for me, it's just making a mess, getting the ingredients, and then I'll do a really detailed outline. But I've already kind of gotten all the creative stuff out, so I'm kind of a hybrid of writing and outlining. Then I'll do, and when I say outline, my outline for a new book I'm working on is 25,000 words. So I'm extremely detailed.
Wow.
It's insane. I felt terrible sending it to.
It's like you're on the opposite ends of a spectrum. You write the first draft without any, and then you outline.
Exactly.
It's the first time I've ever heard a process like that.
It's called reverse outlining. It's a good way to do it.
Well, because if I try to outline cold, it's going to be like a really dry book. Like I need to get that like craziness. Like
That's awesome.
So I don't know if that's a great. It's not efficient at all, but.
Yeah, but it works for you, and that's the only thing that really matters, right? You're the only person who can do the outline that you need. The only person who can do the doodles that are helpful to you. The only person that can create the map that works for your story. So, Nicole, what about you? Did the disco donut come to you before the story, or did the story come and the disco donut kind of serendipitously pop up?
Yeah, no. So it actually takes me a long time to come up with these ideas. The part of the reason why I didn't even start writing books until I was like 30 was that I just kind of thought of myself as not a creative person, because these sort of ideas were not just instantly coming to me. And it takes me a bit of time to get into the story and then kind of add them as I'm going. I used to also just the term pantser, which is like fly by the seat of your pants when you're writing. Don't outline anything, just go. I used to write like that a lot, and I've had to reform as a result of being in publishing and editors and agents asking me for synopsises before I write these books. But I find that for me I try and keep my outlines pretty bare bones to give myself the space to discover things as I'm writing, and not put too much pressure on it. If I don't immediately find the perfect like disco donut or whatever needs to go in there, I will just kind of leave a space for it, keep going, come back to it, go for a walk, like ruminate on it. And then the other thing I will often do for myself is leave random details and clues that I don't know what they mean yet. So like I'll have a character holding something or something in a room, and I don't know, it just pops into my head, like, put this thing here. I don't know what it is now. But then I'll write like 50 more pages, and then all of a sudden this perfect idea to like circle back to that and have it be meaningful will come to me. So I think like giving yourself the freedom within a structure is for me anyway, really helpful. So I try to let my subconscious do a lot of work for me when I can.
Awesome. All right, Lee, the egg or the story? The chicken or the egg? The
So intertwined, honestly.
Yeah.
And I've been writing a long time now, and I've been teaching a long time now. And I honestly sometimes can't separate fiction from fantasy. And, I know I was just thinking about this in preparation for today. I have a 3-year-old, and I wanted to get him to the park, but we're in the pandemic, and we've been to that park a million times. So I ended up, and he loves maps. He really wants to know his place in the world. So I ended up mapping our park, and this was just for one Sunday. I don't know if it's showing up so well here, but anyway, the map ended up having secret bridges and dragon eggs, and I don't know. There's a rock that a giant sneezed on. So I don't know. This is just my life now. It's all intertwined, and so we went on this treasure hunt and found all these. The bizarre thing is we found things that were very magical in the park that day that I wasn't planning on. So the universe was obviously listening.
Really cool. I love that map. I have a couple kids who are just fascinated with maps. You go to the zoo or the botanical garden, and they like to be the map holder, the keeper of the map, navigator.
That's my son.
Right. It's just interesting. I'm so glad that we're talking about maps today, because as a reader, when I get a map, a book, and I open it up and there's a map inside, like I'm all in. Count me in. I just love the idea of getting to actually navigate a different place. Anita, I feel like it's been a long time since we heard from you. We kind of did a reverse circle. So what about you? Did you start hearing Indiana Jones before you knew Ethan, or did you know Ethan and then start hearing Indiana Jones?
So with Ethan Murphy, it started with my children. My children wanted a book with riddles. So I started to think about how to write a book that will include riddles and a child that will be more like my son. So Ethan Murphy is sort of based a little bit on my son. And after I wrote the riddles, I kind of put it in this one because they should be able to carry it around in the pocket, the notebook. So that helped me really. I went hunting for a notebook which can be put in a pocket. So that's what I got. And then I kind of had the character in my mind because it had to be based on my son. Now what I got is the Indiana Jones music. So it all fell in place, the Indiana Jones music. Then I have a character. I started thinking where the character should go. I did some research. Suppose he has to go to Egypt, like in my first book. What I did is research the place and research the place and find out the small basic things that others would know, but it wouldn't occur immediately. So that is how I created the riddles, and I gave it to my children to solve the riddles. And whatever they discussed has come directly to the book, because that's what they would talk when the characters are talking. So that's how I came up with the idea. And then after that is when the story came. After all the research and all the riddles and all that, I knew what is going into the place. Then after that, I made just a basic outline. I do not plan too much into what the characters will talk, where they would go, or how this will happen. That will mostly happen on the fly.
Amazing. That's so cool. I love that you let your kids take the lead with the riddles by it's very authentic to kind of document an actual kid's response, because often it's quite different than an adult response, right? They are definitely frequently out of the box thinkers. The world looks a bit different to them than it does.
Like what we would think of a riddle, what I have thought, and what I would, as a dialogue, I'll put, oh, children will talk like this. But if they are discussing, oh, this means this could mean this. So I know what a child would actually think seeing a riddle.
Right. Well, unfortunately, I think we only even got through like 2 questions, but you all have such amazing answers. I wonder what happens to your doodles, your maps, your riddles once your story is done. Your dragon eggs. Do they stick around? Do they stay, or do you like turn the page on those and move right on?
What do you mean? Like, do I keep them? Is that what you mean?
You
Like,
keep
we have an annual dragon egg hunt every spring. So yeah, no, we need dragon. There's no shortage of dragon eggs kicking around this house.
How do I
that's
get an invite to that?
Yeah.
amazing, right? That's amazing.
And hey, I mean, you should see our house at Halloween. We have like quite the little entrance with all of these things. So
Wow.
yeah, they stick around. We have where most people keep food. We keep dragon eggs and brooms and things like that.
Incredible. I think that's a story in itself. A visit to your house. Well, I think our time is about up. I want to thank each one of you for sharing your tips and techniques and your practice. I think that for people who have a story and want to get it out there, sometimes just hearing someone else talking about what they do is enough to get them started on their way. It also is really kind of cool to know about the beginnings of these incredible stories. So thank you all so much for sharing your practice.